I remember the air. Not the kind you breathe without thinking, but the kind that presses on your skin. Like static before lightning. That's what it felt like the night Karen took over. It wasn't an election. No votes. No warning. She stood up in the middle of our Tuesday HOA meeting, where we usually debated things like mailbox colors or potluck themes, and said flat out, "I'll be running the association now." Not a request. Not a proposal. A fact. Just like that. You know that kind of silence that falls when no one wants to be the first to object? That's what happened. A few people exchanged uncertain glances. Others just looked down at their hands. And Karen, she smiled like someone who had already counted the votes that were never cast. That was the moment everything started to unravel. Karen had always been a little intense. Her lawn looked like it was trimmed with surgical scissors. Her windows gleamed unnaturally, like they were polished with obsession. She wore the same white blouse every meeting, not a wrinkle in sight, and her clipboard was always clutched like it held state secrets. But that night, she wasn't just a concerned neighbor anymore. She was something else. In the days that followed, the rules began to shift. Quietly at first. A freshly printed set of updated community guidelines showed up overnight on the bulletin board, regulations about aesthetic harmony, new restrictions on fence heights, bird feeders, and even the shade of mulch you were allowed to use. It was subtle, but it was firm. And then came the emails. Cold. Clinical. Lengthy. Each one signed Karen M. Thompson, Interim HOA President. And below that? A personal logo. A literal monogram. She was branding her rule. The messages detailed infractions, real or imagined, with photographic evidence, timestamps, and citations pulled from paragraphs nobody had ever noticed in the handbook. At first, most of us ignored it. Just Karen being Karen. Until the warnings turned into fines. I tried to stay out of it. I work from home, freelance writer. My house is clean, lawn neat, paint neutral. But it didn't matter. Karen watched everything. The way you parked. The way your kids played. How long your porch light stayed on after 10 p.m. She started walking the neighborhood every morning. Clipboard in hand. Her tiny white dog, Mopsy, trotting like a little storm trooper behind her. I swear she timed people's sprinklers and measured the trash bin's distance from the curb. We didn't talk about it openly, at least not yet, but the unease grew. You could feel it in the glances exchanged at the mailbox, in the nervous smiles during evening walks. Something had shifted. And then came December. That's when it became war. It started with lights. Mine, to be exact. I put them up early. Classic warm white LEDs, nothing crazy, just enough to add a little glow to the otherwise frozen gloom of winter. I made sure they were compliant. Double-checked the handbook, installed timers, kept them dimmed after 9 p.m. But the second I turned them on, I knew I'd drawn her gaze. The next night, sharp knock on the door. I opened it to find Karen standing there. No clipboard this time. Just her arms crossed and that eerie half-smile on her face. "They're too bright," she said. No greeting. "They're within regulation," I replied. She tilted her head. "Brightness is subjective." "I measured the lumens," I said. "So did I." There was a pause. A long one. "I'm not taking them down," I said. "Then you'll be hearing from the board." The board, of course, was just her. The next morning, my lights were the headline of a community concern thread on our HOA forum. Anonymous, but written in Karen's voice, clipped, righteous, laced with just enough plausible deniability. "One neighbor's excessive decorative display has disrupted the visual peace of our street. While we all value holiday cheer, we must also respect shared spaces." "Thoughts?" Replies flooded in. Some supportive. Some not. But the damage was done. She wasn't just coming for my lights. She was building a case. Gathering allies. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't about regulations. Or aesthetics. Or even rules. This was about control. And if Karen wanted a battle? She'd pick the wrong house. I didn't take the lights down. That might have seemed like a small decision, defiant, maybe even petty. But in our neighborhood, under Karen's thumb, it was enough to trigger a chain reaction I couldn't have predicted. By the next week, she wasn't just angry, she was mobilized. Emails began arriving every morning like clockwork. Not just to me. To the whole street. All titled Community Reminder or Visual Uniformity Notice. Her language was perfectly measured, never aggressive, but always heavy with implication. Certain residents have chosen to disregard seasonal display policies. While festive spirit is appreciated, adherence to visual standards ensures peace for all. Every message felt like a tap on the shoulder followed by a shove in the back. And the weirdest part? Some people started parroting her tone. Neighbors I'd known for years, people I'd shared beers with, helped jumpstart cars for, started looking at me differently. As if I'd committed a crime against shrubbery. One morning, I passed Mr. Langley at the mailbox. Normally he'd nod or ask about the game. That day, he just muttered, "It's not personal. Just following the rules." I didn't even respond. What could I say? They were scared. We all were. Because Karen didn't enforce the rules, she weaponized them. And then, slowly, something shifted. It was subtle at first. A whisper here. A glance there. The kind of silent rebellion that doesn't look like rebellion until it's too late to stop it. It started with Mrs. Peterson. She knocked on my door one evening with a casserole dish in her hands, something warm, cheesy, and completely out of character. She glanced around before speaking. "I used to like Christmas," she said softly, "until I got fined for using a colored wreath." I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know she'd been fined. She handed me the dish. "We're not all on her side, you know. Some of us remember when this place used to feel like home." That was the first crack. Then came Henderson. A quiet man. Retired accountant. Kept to himself. Always raking his yard with military precision. One night, I found him waiting near my mailbox. "You still have your lights up," he said. I nodded. "Good. We need someone to be first." He handed me a USB drive. No explanation, just a name, Karen Thompson HOA Transactions.xlsx. Inside? A spreadsheet. Dozens of entries. HOA fund withdrawals for emergency landscaping, equipment rentals, consulting services. But here's the thing, I'd never seen a landscaper in months. The park bench they supposedly replaced still had the same crack in the wood as last year. "She's laundering through her son's company," Henderson said. "Shell accounts. No board approval." "And how long have you known?" "Long enough." "Why haven't you said anything?" He shrugged. "Fear is powerful." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about me and some lights. Karen had built a system, one that fed on silence, on compliance, on fear. But every system has a flaw. And hers? It was built too tightly. You pull one thread, and the whole thing could collapse. I decided to pull it. That night, I started collecting everything. Screenshots of her emails. Photos of unaddressed maintenance she claimed had been completed. Forum posts. Financial documents. Every neighbor who whispered their discontent, I asked them for more. And they gave it to me. Quietly. Carefully. We formed a group chat. Nothing obvious, just called it Book Club. In case she ever looked over someone's shoulder. Henderson became our treasurer of truth. Mrs. Peterson? Our historian. And me? I was the guy with the lights, the symbol, apparently. Not by choice, but there I was. We weren't a resistance. Not yet. But something was building. And then Karen made a mistake. A big one. She sent out a public accusation, an official HOA citation, accusing me of tampering with neighborhood electrical systems. Claiming that my light display was causing surges. It was false. And provably so. My wiring was certified. I had permits. But the real problem? She CC'd the entire community. That was the moment the quiet ones started to speak. Replies poured in. He's right. The street lights have been flickering for months. Didn't she say they upgraded the wiring last year? My dues keep going up. Where is the money going? For the first time in years, the tide shifted. And Karen? Karen doubled down. She started patrolling more aggressively. Taking photos in the dark. Filing citations by hand. One neighbor got a warning for excessively moist grass. Another for aggressive decorative angles. It was madness. But madness has a half-life. And we were nearing the end of hers. It happened on a Tuesday. It always seemed to happen on Tuesdays with Karen. Maybe she thought that day had some kind of power, the same day she seized the HOA. The same day she tried to break me with a clipboard and a citation. Maybe she thought patterns made her strong. But this Tuesday, the pattern turned against her. It started with a motion sensor camera. Not mine. Mr. Johnson's. Most people thought old Mr. Johnson was just the quiet guy on the corner. He rarely left his porch. Always had a pipe in hand, even though I never saw him light it. He watched everything: kids biking, dogs walking, Karen storming by like a windstorm with a bun. He was our silent security system. And as it turned out, he had footage. Clear, high-definition, time-stamped footage. That night, Karen crossed a line she couldn't uncross. At 2:14 a.m., she stepped onto my property. No hesitation. No disguise. Just a dark jacket zipped up and a pair of gardening shears in her hand. She didn't knock. Didn't ring the bell. She went straight for the lights, clipping wires, unplugging timers, yanking cords out of sockets like they were veins she needed to sever to feel alive again. Then she pulled out a screwdriver and pried open the side panel of my exterior power unit, the one that fed into my lighting and security system. One wrong move, one wrong wire. That's exactly what she did. What Karen didn't know, and what Mr. Johnson's camera caught perfectly, was that our grid was linked. Her sabotage caused a surge. In her own home. I didn't know about the fire until I heard the sirens. They lit up the neighborhood like a war zone, red and white pulses dancing across garage doors and hedges, washing over carefully manicured lawns like judgment. I stood in my doorway, heart thudding, watching firefighters run hoses into Karen's house. The smell hit first: burned plastic, scorched insulation, something acrid and unmistakable. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't smiling. But I wasn't surprised. Because it wasn't just her house that burned that night. It was the lie she'd built around herself. By morning, the truth was leaking. The fire department traced the surge back to a manual tampering of an exterior power control. Insurance was called in. And then came the bombshell. Karen had disabled her fire alarm system weeks earlier to prevent false triggers from nearby landscaping dust, according to the paperwork she filed. It was a lie. And insurance companies don't like lies. Especially when there's video evidence. Yes, she filed a claim. A big one. Inflated losses, forged receipts, and a story about a power grid malfunction caused by an unnamed resident's irresponsible wiring. She blamed me. But I had proof. The emergency HOA meeting was chaos. For the first time in years, the community hall was full. No coffee. No cookies. No smiles. Just tension thick enough to slice. People came with binders. Notes. Screenshots. Henderson stood first. Calm. Precise. He presented the spreadsheets, the diverted funds, the phony landscaping charges, the suspicious vendor invoices. Mrs. Peterson followed. She told her story, the fines, the fear, the anonymous threats that were never really anonymous. And then came Mr. Johnson. He didn't say a word. He just placed a USB drive into the projector and hit play. There she was. Karen. On my property. Cutting cords. Smirking. And the moment the lights went out on screen, the real Karen started to panic. I was trying to protect the neighborhood, she cried. His lights were dangerous. You've all seen them. But no one responded. Not this time. The vote to remove her was unanimous. But it didn't end there. Because as we adjourned, a police officer entered the room. Badge out. Calm voice. Karen Thompson, you are under arrest for insurance fraud, property damage, and unlawful entry. Silence. Then applause. It wasn't loud, not at first. Just a few claps. Then more. It grew, a tidal wave of relief, of people reclaiming what had been taken. Karen didn't look at anyone as they led her out. She didn't say a word. Maybe for the first time in her life. The next day, her house stood blackened and empty, a scorched monument to the control she once held. And for the first time in months, the neighborhood felt light. Not perfect. Not utopian. But real. People were outside again, raking, walking dogs, chatting on sidewalks. Someone put up a community potluck flyer. Someone else fixed the swing at the park. Even Henderson smiled, actually smiled, when he passed me. And me? I turned my lights back on. Same display. Same bulbs. But this time, they felt like something more. Not decorations. Not defiance. Freedom. The day after Karen was arrested, it rained. Not a storm, nothing dramatic. Just a soft, persistent drizzle that turned the sidewalks slick and washed the soot from the curb in front of her house. It was almost too poetic. The kind of thing you'd roll your eyes at in a movie. But standing there, watching that blackened shell of a house disappear behind the mist, I couldn't help but feel it was the closest thing we'd get to closure. And still, part of me kept looking over my shoulder. Because when someone has ruled your life for that long, even unofficially, their absence doesn't feel like freedom right away. It feels like silence. And silence can be unnerving. Karen didn't return. That much was clear by the end of the week. Her car disappeared. A real estate sign appeared. The windows, once so spotless they reflected your guilt back at you, were now smudged, broken. Stripped of her presence, the house looked ordinary. Smaller. We all expected her to fight. File an appeal. Leave flamingos on our lawns in retaliation. Send threatening letters from jail, signed in her unmistakable cursive. But she didn't. And that's what scared us the most. The HOA board met again a few days later, this time, without Karen, without the clipboards and laminated flyers, without the tension that used to hang in the air like humidity. The room was different. Lighter. People smiled, real smiles. No one interrupted. No one sighed theatrically when someone brought up trash bins. We had real conversations. There were apologies. Laughter. Plans for a new community garden. A motion passed to remove 8 of Karen's bylaws, unanimously. Someone even suggested bringing back the 4th of July barbecue. Someone else volunteered to organize it. I watched all of this from the back row, arms crossed, not speaking much. Just listening. Just absorbing the unfamiliar sound of people acting like neighbors instead of suspects. And then something unexpected happened. They voted me in. Temporary HOA chair. Just until we could organize real elections. I didn't want it. Honestly, I tried to decline. But I saw their faces, the relief, the trust. After everything, they needed someone who hadn't just followed the rules. They needed someone who had fought them. Over the next few weeks, something beautiful happened. Not perfect. Not instant. But real. People came out of their homes more. Talked more. Kids played in the street again without parents snapping at them to stay quiet. Or watch for Karen. Lawn ornaments started popping up again. Garden gnomes, flamingos, even a hand-painted sign that read, "All lumens welcome." It made me laugh out loud when I saw it. Turns out, Mrs. Peterson painted it herself. She said it was therapeutic. Henderson came by one morning with fresh coffee and a stack of folders. "Thought I'd help you get started," he said. I flipped through them. Budget sheets. Vendor quotes. A few handwritten notes with phrases like, actually useful, and not a scam, scribbled in the margins. He looked around the yard and said, You keeping the lights up? I nodded. Good, he said. They look like hope. And maybe that's what they were. They didn't blink anymore. I disabled the timers. I kept them on all night. Not because I needed to make a statement, but because I didn't need to hide anymore. No one did. The funny thing is, we were never a bad neighborhood. We were just stuck. Locked in this illusion of order, mistaking silence for peace, rules for community. Karen didn't create that. She just used it. What came after her wasn't chaos. It was clarity. And the truth was simple. When fear leaves, people remember how to care again. I spent one evening walking the block. No agenda. Just walking. Janice was out watering her begonias. She waved. The Hendersons were putting up string lights, the multicolored kind Karen hated. Their grandkids helped hang them from the porch railing. And across the street, Mr. Johnson sat on his porch with his old pipe, nodding like he knew this moment would come all along. I crossed over and sat with him. We didn't say much. Just watched the lights flicker on, one house at a time. You'd think after everything, the meetings, the arrests, the fire, that life would just go back to how it was before Karen. But that's the thing about control. Once it's gone, it leaves a vacuum. And nature? It abhors a vacuum. For a while, we held our breath, expecting someone else to step up and seize the crown. A new Karen. A softer, subtler tyrant waiting in the wings. But no one did. Maybe we'd finally learned. Or maybe we'd changed. The lights stayed up through January. Then February. I added more, small ones, twinkling along the back fence, under the eaves, coiled around the trunk of the big tree out front. Warm white, soft yellow. Inviting. People asked about them, smiled at them. They became more than lights. They became a symbol. A quiet reminder of what we'd come through, and what we'd never go back to. One afternoon, Mrs. Peterson knocked on my door again. This time with no casserole, just a folded piece of paper. Thought you should be the one to read this first, she said. It was a letter. Handwritten. From Karen. It had been mailed to the HOA P.O. box, addressed only to the neighborhood. She didn't sign it as president, or use a title at all. It wasn't long. She said she never meant to lose control. That what started as protecting standards turned into something she couldn't see clearly until it was gone. She admitted to the fraud. Not proudly. But honestly. She ended with, If the lights are still up, tell him, they were beautiful. I just couldn't stand what they represented. I read it twice. Then folded it carefully. What are you going to do with it? Mrs. Peterson asked. I shrugged. Nothing. Maybe frame it next to my power bill. We both laughed. Spring came early that year. We held the barbecue. The entire block showed up. There were kids, dogs, beer in coolers, music spilling out of Bluetooth speakers. Someone even rigged a projector to show a movie on their garage door, Back to the Future. Poetic. I sat in a lawn chair, paper plate on my lap, watching the community rebuild itself in real time. Not with rules, not with votes, with presence. With conversations. With trust. Karen's house was bought a month later by a young couple with a baby on the way. They planted tulips in the front yard, red ones. The exact variety Karen once tried to ban. No one said a word. Except Mr. Henderson, who walked by and called them refreshing. We all knew what he meant. I still get questions about the lights. People ask if I'm going to take them down now. If I'll replace them with something more neutral. I always give the same answer. Not until I forget what they stood for. Because it's not just about the bulbs. Or the colors. Or the HOA. It's about the moment we stop being afraid of one woman with a clipboard. It's about the choice to speak when silence would be easier. It's about the power of saying enough. The new HOA charter is 2 pages long now. Simple. Fair. Voted on. It ends with this line: "This community thrives not because we enforce sameness, but because we protect the space for difference." And that's what I'll remember most. Not the fire. Not the fines. Not even the arrest. But the way people stepped out of their homes and remembered they were part of something bigger. And the way those lights, once called excessive, offensive, dangerous, became a beacon. A rally. A legacy. And in the darkest winter we'd ever known, they were the first thing to shine. And the last thing to go out.